All right, good morning. I'm Brian LaPasse, Chief of Program Services for OPSC. With me today is Tracy Sharp, Operations Manager in Program Services. We have a whole host of others as well. But Tracy and I will be facilitating today's meeting and helping out with questions and answers after the presentations. We have two topics today, both of which we have received feedback that we value very much. We got a lot of feedback on these, and I thank you for that. We look forward to presenting these topics to you today as well. We know how important they are to all of you. And again, thank you so much for all the information that you sent in and all the time you took to share your thoughts and comments with us. It really means a lot to us, and it's very, very helpful in providing what we're going to show you today. So thank you very much. The first topic that we're going to be covering is interim housing and natural disaster assistance provisions from Prop 2. Casey Barr is going to be presenting that topic today. We did a prior meeting on this topic back in February, on February 13th, and we're looking forward to continuing that discussion. We actually have regulations today for that as well. So, as I've mentioned in prior meetings, I encourage you to look at those regulations if you have the time, especially if you have experience with them and how they work. It's a really crucial period when we're drafting these regulations and getting them ready to submit to the SAB and then ultimately to be promulgated through the rulemaking process. So, if you can invest some time in reviewing them with us today and also in your spare time or after the meeting and sending us any information you might have or some thoughts on that, we really appreciate it. It helps us to make those regulations as good as they can be. Secondly, today, I'm going to be going over the most recent updates to the 5-year master plan requirement in Prop 2. We got lots of feedback on this one, and we've been carefully working through the comments. We've received some really good thoughts. We've had some meetings actually in person with a few of you, and those have been very productive. We appreciate everything that you've been offering. So we'll be presenting some additional proposals for you today and answering some questions. These are both topics that I think we'll be back for the interim housing, maybe one more meeting, the 5-year plan, probably at least a couple more meetings, if not 3. So we're still, I don't want to say we're in preliminary stage, but we're starting to get there, but we still have lots of time. So please don't feel shy about sharing any comments you have. Really looking forward to our discussion today. And also, please feel free to enter any questions in there, like I mentioned. I'm going to be turning it over to Casey here, but first I'm going to share the item so you can see that. Okay, everybody should have that item up in front of them. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Casey.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us once again. As Brian mentioned, my name is Casey Barr, and today I'm joining you to continue the discussion of the implementation of Proposition 2, specifically for interim housing and natural disaster assistance. Now, before we dive into the stakeholder feedback and responses, I want to briefly review the provisions of Education Code Section 17075.20. Throughout this presentation, I will refer to this section as the new statute to simplify things. So OPSC previously discussed the provisions of and concepts for the implementation of this new statute at the February 13th stakeholder meeting, as Brian mentioned earlier. The new statute provides authority for the State Allocation Board to fund interim housing following a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency. This provision also authorizes the board to provide quote-unquote, any other assistance. I would like to preface that for purposes of this discussion, the new sliding scale matching shares and existing financial hardship criteria are applicable to this program. So moving on to page 2 of this item, I will take a look at the stakeholder feedback received and OPSC's responses since our previous discussion. For question number 1, the stakeholder requested clarification as to if leased portables may be purchased using new construction eligibility, and for further explanation as to how the purchased portables may impact the new construction baseline eligibility. OPSC's response is that leased portables do not qualify for new construction funding. As per school facility program regulations, the board only provides new construction funding if the application was received by OPSC prior to the date of occupancy for classrooms. Therefore, the district's new construction eligibility baselines would be adjusted by the respective grade level of the portable at the time of the purchase or at the time the leased portables exceed the 5 years to provide interim housing, notwithstanding subdivision I of adjustments to the new construction baseline eligibility regulation, just as any other locally funded facilities placed on site would be. This concept is included within the proposed regulations within attachment A6B of this item. Moving to page number 3, regarding the concept of being double hit for capacity, if the purchased portables are used as part of the reconstruction of the school, then they are not being purchased for purposes of interim housing. Interim housing is intended to be temporary capacity, where it's assumed that once the destroyed or severely damaged classrooms are reconstructed or rehabilitated back to their original capacity, the interim housing will no longer be necessary or needed. OPSC recognizes the need for a more detailed discussion of the implications of net losses or net gains of classrooms, with interim housing as a factor as necessary. And as a result, we're anticipating discussing this at a future meeting in detail. Let's see, moving to page number 4, OPSC proposes a new adjustment type specific to adjustments for interim housing in order to differentiate between typical adjustments pursuant to subdivision I of the adjustments to the new construction baseline eligibility regulation, which often accounts for added capacity with hybrid projects. This would be to accurately track the use of interim housing and make any necessary adjustments. This new proposed adjustment will also be presented at a future meeting. All right, now moving on to page number 5 for question 2. The stakeholder proposed to create a standardized emergency interim housing grant, similar to design or preliminary grants. So OPSC has considered this grant and believes that creating a standard may be a bit too limiting for funding purposes due to the unknown factors that funding may be requested for. To question number 3, the stakeholder requested clarification as to whether school districts can apply for funding on behalf of charter schools not located on district-owned sites. So OPSC's response is that per the statute, access to this funding is limited to facilities on district-owned sites, as the funding is for school districts and county offices of education impacted by a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency. As such, charter schools located on non-district-owned sites would not be able to apply for this assistance. Okay, and for question number 4, stakeholder noted that waiting for reimbursement may pose a financial challenge for districts, particularly after the unforeseen disasters, with the proposed solution of the submission of verified quotes for the minimum amount needed and a later reconciliation of excess funds provided. OPSC agrees that the flexibility for school districts is important, particularly in these unexpected circumstances. And so as a result, we propose that if associated costs are higher than proposed estimates, school districts can submit an additional request with supporting documentation. And then finally, on page 6 of the item under question number 5, a stakeholder requested clarification regarding the timing of state and local funds. So OPSC anticipates processing applications specifically for interim housing assistance pursuant to the new statute subdivision A within 30 to 60 calendar days from the date an application is received. This is inclusive of financial hardship applicants. With that being said, OPSC would like to sincerely thank the stakeholders that contributed with their feedback and questions following that initial presentation of this item back in February. It's significantly helped inform the development of the item being presented today. So for reference, the full text of stakeholder feedback can be seen on attachment B of this item. So next, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a brief overview of the proposed regulations that we've developed. As mentioned previously, the full text of these proposed regulations can be found on attachment A6B of this item. Starting with the existing definitions section, OPSC proposes one amendment and one addition to this section. The first is to amend the definition of interim housing to include the rental, purchase, or lease of classrooms used to house pupils temporarily displaced due to a natural disaster that is pursuant to the provisions of this new statute. Amending this definition allows for the proposed sections for this assistance to have a clearly defined term for interim housing, as its current definition is limited to the temporary displacement of students due to modernization projects. And then on page 7 of the item, the addition to the section of regulations is to incorporate a new definition for an interim housing and natural disaster assistance request form. for school districts to use to request this assistance. So this form will be presented for stakeholder consideration at a future meeting with a bit more of an official title and details to follow. So next, for Regulation Section 1859.80, OPSC proposes to add subdivision D, which would indicate that a district shall qualify for hardship assistance under the new statute. Subsequently, OPSC also proposes a new section 1859.84 within the hardship assistance component of regulations to introduce the concept of interim housing and natural disaster assistance as separate requests. So subsequent to the proposed .84, OPSC is proposing two additional sections, one for interim housing assistance requests and one for natural disaster assistance requests. The new proposed section .84.1 is specific to interim housing assistance, inclusive of provisions of the new statute subdivisions A through D. So just going through the notable components of the section that we haven't really touched on, we'll start with subdivision A1, wherein it specifies that the declared state of emergency must be open at the time of application submittal. This is to provide a limitation for how long a school district may be eligible to seek funding for assistance and to provide equity for school districts in immediate need, as well as school districts who have submitted requests for funding. Subdivision B indicates necessary documentation to submit to request assistance under this section, notably the new proposed form. In addition to the documentation, which includes the actual costs, including but not limited to invoices or lease agreements, and documentation that includes work associated with placing the portable classrooms on a site. In lieu of actual costs, districts may provide bid proposals, quotes, or other documentation that supports the amount of the funding request. Under subdivision D, for all leasing or purchasing portable requests, school districts must include documentation demonstrating that costs associated with interim housing have not been covered by insurance proceeds or any other local, state, or federal government disaster assistance. Subsection E has been briefly discussed in response to the stakeholder question, number 1, wherein the new construction eligibility may be adjusted for any net increase in classroom capacity resulting from the lease and or purchase of portable classrooms pursuant to the existing section 1859.51 subdivision I. Subsection F indicates that school districts can request financial hardship assistance in advance or in conjunction with an application for this assistance. Subsection G indicates that interim housing may not be requested in place of an school facility program new construction or modernization application or a facility hardship application. And finally, subdivision I notes that grants provided in accordance with this section will be adjusted for projects that receive advanced funding prior to receiving final insurance proceeds or government disaster assistance for interim housing, wherein the grants will be reduced by 50% of any insurance proceeds or government assistance collected after the apportionment. So moving to page number 8 of the item, the next proposed section, .84.2, is specific to any other assistance. This regulation will be for natural disaster assistance and is pursuant to subdivision E of the new statute. Notable components of this subsection include that this assistance shall be requested through a new form, including the background and circumstances for the request, information relevant to the request that demonstrates funding from insurance proceeds, and local, state, and federal government disaster assistance is insufficient to rehabilitate or reconstruct school facilities that existed at the time of the natural disaster. Also, a statement explaining why the board should grant the district's request based on law, regulation, or other basis. So moving on to page 9 of the item, the regulation section for modernization project funding order. With this, OPSC proposes amending this regulation to indicate that the funding order for modernization applications received pursuant to the proposed section for natural disaster assistance shall be funded second after facility hardship funding applications. Following that, the regulation section for the new construction project funding order, OPSC proposes amending the regulation to indicate that applications for interim housing assistance shall be funded first, shifting facility hardship funding applications to second, and applications received pursuant to natural disaster assistance to third. So that concludes the proposed regulatory amendments for stakeholder consideration. And as mentioned previously, the full text of those proposed amendments can be found on attachment A6B. So next, we're going to look at additional proposed items. So as mentioned previously, OPSC anticipates presenting a new form at a future meeting for districts to request assistance for both interim housing and natural disaster assistance. A portion of the proposed form instructions are included on page 9 of the item. Additionally, on page number 10, OPSC is anticipating to prepare a checklist comparable to the facility hardship request form for stakeholder consideration at a future meeting. The facility hardship request form may be found on OPSC's website linked on this page. The document would not be required for submittal, but would simply serve as a helpful tool. Okay, and then on the same page here, OPSC is seeking stakeholder feedback regarding the concept of adjustments to the new construction eligibility baseline regarding this assistance, as there is a statutory requirement to adjust baselines for any purchased portables, as well as a regulatory requirement for leased portable classrooms under the school facility program regulation for adjustments to the new construction baseline eligibility. So as mentioned earlier, OPSC anticipates proposing a new adjustment for the new construction baseline eligibility regulation. And as such, for purposes of tracking leased and purchased portables, we're requesting feedback regarding viewing the adjustment as the following. A placeholder adjustment on the new construction eligibility baseline, where upon the completion of the rebuilt school, a reversal of the adjustment may take place upon demonstration of either A, the portable classroom lease ends and they are returned to the manufacturer, or alternatively, B, the school district sells or removes the portable classrooms purchased for purposes of interim housing if it may have been more cost effective to purchase than lease. So moving on to page number 11, OPSC has developed an example of the interim housing assistance grant on the chart that you can see. So I would like to note that the dollar amounts included are for illustration purposes only and are by no means reflective of actual costs. So in this example, a fire significantly damaged 20 out of 22 total classrooms at an elementary school. To lease a portable is $5,000 per classroom per month. So multiplying 20 classrooms by $5,000 a month equals $100,000 a month. So for purposes of the total lease cost in this example, $100,000 would be multiplied by the duration of need, in this case 24 months, which would be $2,400,000. The site placement costs per classroom are $10,000 a classroom, which if you multiply by the 20 classrooms is $200,000. So inclusive of the utilities installation costs and the site development costs listed on the chart, the total grant for this assistance would be $2,630,000. Therefore, under a 50-50 state and local match, it would be a $1,315,000 state match and $1,315,000 local match. So a chart on page 12 of this item further breaks down on how the new sliding scales matching share may alter the 50-50 match in this example. So after looking at this example, I'd like to move on and examine the broader concept of, quote, any other assistance, end quote, of subdivision E in the new statute. So OPSC recognizes the need to define this statutory language. This language is broad, but in this broadness, it allows for OPSC to exhaust program options while also allowing for case-by-case evaluations of applications for this assistance. So kind of going through pages 12 and 13 of the item, OPSC provides some examples of previous items from recent years that have been presented to the board as appeal requests and also received board approval. These items would appear to qualify for natural disaster assistance through the lens of any other assistance in accordance with currently proposed regulations, as they experienced a natural disaster for which the governor declared a state of emergency. So as a result, OPSC proposes that one method of requesting any other assistance could be requesting accelerated processing and funding for new construction and modernization applications for eligible applicants. So shifting to the last page, the board may also consider providing any other assistance for facilities that do not fit the typical classroom definition under this assistance, such as office or administrative space, interior dining areas, or restrooms. OPSC sincerely appreciates any feedback regarding these concepts and proposed regulations, and at a future stakeholder meeting, we anticipate continuing the conversation on new construction and modernization eligibility adjustments for any net gains or losses in classrooms with interim housing as a factor, as mentioned previously. Further examples of any other assistance applications, and then also the new interim housing and natural disaster assistance request form. So with that all said, I would like to thank you all very much for your time. I know this is a very hardy item to get through, but a very important one. So with that, this concludes my presentation, and we look forward to hearing your input. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Casey. Yeah, that's a lot of info, but very well presented. Thank you very much. As Casey mentioned when she was going through the kind of the summary of the regulations, we have them. I'm going to scroll down to them right now so you can see what I'm talking about, but we have them in this item. So this is what I was talking about, that if you have the time or the wherewithal to go look through these, we'd really appreciate it. We are making these the best way that we know how. We do have a lot of experience promulgating regs, but every word means something, every space, every comma, they all mean something. So if you see anything in there that you think could be improved or to provide some more clarity, or maybe if you think we might have missed something or gotten something wrong, please let us know. We'll have at least one more look at these before we take them to the SAB. But if you can, you kind of follow along through that item, and we'll describe what is happening in each of these sections. But then you can actually see what we did if you scroll down to this area of the item. So it's tough to go through these line by line in a format like this. There's just so many things to look at. We could probably spend the entire day looking through them word by word. But I do encourage you to go ahead and take a look at those when you do have the time, if you haven't already. And I don't see any questions yet, but we're open for questions now. So if you have any questions about anything that Casey mentioned or anything else having to do with this, now would be a great time to speak up. These are those two entirely new sections that Casey was mentioning, the interim housing assistance in 84.1. This will be a brand new section in our regulations. And then we have the one that corresponds to the natural disaster assistance here. It's really too bad that we need to have these kinds of programs, but it's something that we're seeing a lot more often, unfortunately, these days. And so we're hoping that by way of these regulations, we'll be a lot more prepared to lend assistance out there as it's needed. No, I'm not seeing any questions. Anybody have any questions down there? Okay. I'll take that as a vote of confidence, as I always do. Oh, there is a question. Kim Van Gundy says, I want to make sure you are actually interpreting the regulations to mean only a natural disaster declared by the governor. So if a school experiences an earthquake in a region that has damage but is not declared, then it does not qualify.
Yeah, that's correct. That's because of the statute that drives this section. It has to do with governor's state of emergency specifically.
I would also add we have our seismic program, and the facility hardship program, which has not gone away. So there's options there for applying for assistance.
Yeah, Kim, we have seen mudslides. I remember one specifically. I don't want to say the district. Yeah, and flooding too. Those, if there is an emergency declaration, we could use these provisions. However, like Tracy mentioned, we've been able to fund a lot of those projects through the facility hardship program. Yeah. It's a great question. Thank you, Kim. Yeah, all those things, fire too. Yeah. Michael Gold says an adjustment is made to new construction eligibility for interim housing. Where do new regulations mention the reversal of that adjustment once the interim housing is removed? I believe we only make an adjustment if they are there for longer than 5 years.
That's the one we're going to bring back at the next meeting as well. Under dot 51 and 61.
Yeah. So if it's within that first period, we won't adjust. We will adjust once they become more permanent, I guess you could say, after 5 years. thank you for those comments and questions. Really appreciate it. Anyone else before we move on? Okay. We're going to continue our discussion on the 5-year master plan requirement that's in Prop 2. Before I begin, I wanted to take a moment again and thank you for all the comments. We take it very seriously. We got a lot of really good ideas, and that's exactly what we hoped would happen. I also want to make it clear that while there's a very clear requirement to submit a plan, we do want to make it as user-friendly as we possibly can. We have to make sure that the requirements are being met, and the intent of the statute is being maintained, though. So we're trying to balance those two things. We're trying to keep it as flexible as we can, while making sure that we're meeting the criteria that's in the law. So with that, kind of going through the background here, it outlines, and there's some reminders here of what Prop 2 requires so far as the master plan goes. There needs to be specific elements related to inventory of facilities and sites and properties. There's going to be guidelines developed by CDE and OPSC for both the creation of master plan and also the creation of standards for reporting required information. That's what we're working on right now. We already have been working with them. The state controller has to inform requirements related to the K through 12 audit guide. And then also school districts are required to update and create master plans to reflect changes in enrollment or capacity as it relates to school facility program needs. Because we have ongoing submittals right now that are continuing while we're preparing the details, the SAB took some actions at their December meeting, which are outlined at the top of page 2 here. You can see for projects that were received, for applications that were received on or after October 31st of last year, 2024. We've reviewed these several times. I think you've all seen them, but if you want to look at them again, they're right here on page 2 for you. I'm going to jump into the feedback we received. We got a lot of it, and we've done our best to summarize these comments starting here. If you don't see your specific question, it's probably because we got a similar question and we've restated it. We've tried to kind of combine our answers so that we're not answering the same question over and over. So if you don't see your question specifically, it's likely just because we had something very similar. If we did miss something, though, let us know, and we'll address it next time. But I think we did a pretty good job of capturing everything. Starting with question 1, this question is about OPSC's proposed intake process and evaluation, and if the plans need to be pre-checked by anyone, by CDE or any other agency prior to being submitted. We plan to check the plans. OPSC is going to be checking the plans for content, and that all the required components from the statutes are in place. If there's anything missing, we're intending to reach out as quickly as we can once we receive them to request anything that's not there. Or if it's necessary for anyone to make any augmentations to it. It's also not necessary for anyone to pre-check the master plan before you submit it to us. We're happy to answer questions you might have in advance, but it's not something that's required. And we're not going to be going checking the content of the plans for anything specific aside for checking that all the requirements in education code are met. So there's that one. Question 2, and this is kind of a longer answer here. It's asking about the 5-year term of the plan and what happens if the submitted plan is longer than just 5 years. We heard a lot of feedback that these plans typically are longer than 5 years, especially in a larger district. They might be planning for 10 or 20 years. The education code does require a 5-year plan. Again, we understand that there might be some plans that are already developed and they're more than that. But like we proposed last time, and we're continuing this, is that the plans that you do submit have at least 4 years remaining from the time it was school board approved. So your local school board approved it, has at least 4 years remaining when it's submitted to OPSC. Ultimately, when we get past those early provisions for applications being submitted at this early stage. This means really for districts that are really active in our program that are submitting several applications every year, you wouldn't need to update more than once a year to keep it above the 4-year mark, depending on when that maturity date is. We're also recommending that each school district readopt or certify that the plan has either been it's still accurate or that you're able to use the same plan, nothing significant's changed if you're reusing a plan. So if you submitted a plan last month and then you have another application coming in this month, but your plan hasn't changed, we're going to be asking that you certify that there has been no changes. We will accept applications that only contain amendments from prior versions of the same plan. If it's just updated to reflect the current year status, so that the entire plan doesn't have to be recreated, we will accept addendums or amendments to an existing plan that brings it up to current status for the next 5 years. For plans that are longer than just 5 years, if they're, like I said, 10 or 20 years, we recommend that to comply with statute, the plan be detailed enough to delineate what's going to be occurring over the next 5 years. But we will accept a plan that's longer than that as long as the 5-year requirements are clear, just so we can meet that statutory requirement of 5 years. And then lastly, let me scroll down here. There's a lot of information in that answer. Lastly, related to amending formally submitted plans, OPSC proposes that addendums or as addendums or significant changes occur to it, the next submittal should reflect those updates. So if there's something that's happened in a 6-month period between when the last time you submitted a plan and when you're submitting one now, we ask that you're going to be, or we ask that you update the plan to reflect those things. This is actually something that was sent in by one of our stakeholders, and we thought it was a really good idea. So we're echoing those thoughts in our item. I wanted to stop here and see if there's any questions so far, especially on this question. It's something that we got a lot of input on. And so I wanted to take a pause and see if anybody had any questions related to this specific item that I'm talking about right now. I'm going to give you just a minute there to type something in if you'd like to. Looks like there might be a question down in the dining room too.
Yes, there are. Hey, Brian, I'm headless on my end, but this is Rebecca Colleen with Coalition for Adequate School Housing. Not a question so much as a comment specifically on this issue of needing to refresh and submit an updated plan essentially on an annual basis. We don't read the statute that way, so CASH is not in agreement with that interpretation. We don't want the master plan to inhibit access to the program. We understand that we're working within the requirements of the statute, but we think that the intent of a 5-year plan is truly that, planning for 5 years, not planning over 1 year and then resetting every year. You know, if you think about submitting an application in the 3rd year of a 5-year master plan, you're in the process of implementing that plan. And I think that application and that project demonstrates that you're on track and you're implementing your plan. So we're really concerned about this being more than a speed bump for some districts that could inhibit access. I'm not sure if there's some wiggle room or some space to continue talking about this issue, but we think an annual update to a 5-year plan is overly onerous.
Yeah, I think where that comes from is we're trying to maintain the requirement that's in the statute language that says it's a 5-year plan. We can consider what you're saying. I hear and I understand what you're talking about. I think we're just mostly trying to make sure that we're in compliance.
Yeah, let's keep talking about it, Brian. I really appreciate that. I think from a framework standpoint, we appreciate where this is going overall. And this is really the first thing that's given us a significant amount of pause in the implementation. So we appreciate your willingness to think flexibly about how we maintain compliance with the statutory requirements while balancing not making it overly difficult for districts to access the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca, do you have like a recommendation on, you know, what if a 5-year plan is made and the application is not submitted till say like 4 years, you know, later? You know, how recent is recent in terms of a 5-year plan?
Yeah, I think what we're thinking is that when the clock starts and stops on the 5 years, so if we're going with board approval, if you are in if it's year 4 after that board approval, you're still within the 5-year timeline of that 5-year plan. So we would argue that that plan is still current, you're still implementing that plan, and that application should be able to use that plan.
Okay.
Rebecca, just to be clear, so you're suggesting like, for instance, if someone were to submit a plan on January 1st, 2026, it would be valid until January 1st, 2031.
Yes, that's correct. And I think that there's some space to explore some of these ideas about, well, if you've had a substantive update or something that's really material, let's say you have enrollment totally tank or something like that, that we can look at that, but that, you know, if things are pretty much stable, you're in the process of implementing that plan, year 3, year 4, that plan should still be valid.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see, we have a question in the chat. It says, if a district's funding application isn't reviewed for 4 years after it's been submitted, is the 5-year plan required to be updated when the application is processed? I think, Ilana, that's a similar question to what I think we're talking about right now. So that goes along with what we're kind of discussing. What we're proposing here is that it has at least 4 years remaining on the 5-year plan when it comes in. And so I think in the example you're providing there, if I'm reading it correctly, yeah, that would require an update for what our current proposal is. But you know, we're still talking. And Lana says, to clarify, is the date of the 5-year plan based on when the application is submitted or processed? The date of the 5-year plan we're proposing coincides to when the school board adopts it. Lori asks, will districts have time to have time to have their plan recertified by the board if the facility master plan is expired at the time of review? It should be done before you come in, but that's one of those things that will probably flag when it comes in and give you some time to go and, you know, if it's not in compliance when we receive it, we plan on looking at them as quickly as we can and then addressing any needs that might be there. Kind of like right now when you submit an application, if it's missing a document, we'll reach out to you and say, hey, you're missing your, you know, you're missing this letter or this approval, whatever it might be. We'll give you some time to review that or clean it up before we issue a submittal or a receive date. Okay, great questions. Thank you. I'm going to move on to question number, or to response number 3 in the item. This question is asking if the master plan can be more selective to only the schools pursuing funding. So can it be specific? The way that we interpreted this is, can it be specific to just the project that are going to be having needs in the next 5 years? The way that we interpret the guiding statute is to require a comprehensive district-wide plan. It's reinforced in several areas, one of which, to just give an example, is it requires a site-by-site inventory for the whole district. So we don't think it's just geared towards individual schools that might be pursuing funding or having activity in the next 5 years. It refers to the entire district plan for the next 5 years. Question number 4. Question number 4 is asking if the cost to develop the master plan is an eligible expenditure. Another very popular question we got. And I just want to say too that we realize the impact of this, and we looked at this very carefully. Generally speaking, the SFP considers something like this to be an operational cost, and those are not eligible expenditures under the program. However, we do see a provision in the new small size school district program. There's a new grant that's created in that program. And if you've been following these meetings, you've seen, we're going to be talking about it a week from today, actually. But we've talked about it before too. There's a new project and construction management grant that's part of the small size school district program. And we think it's pretty clear in statute that the costs associated with the creation of a master plan for projects participating in that program would be an eligible expenditure. The SFP doesn't provide that kind of, I guess, it doesn't permit that, but this new program, it appears to permit it. So that's what we think right now. We've been looking at this very carefully, like I said, and that's where we're at with it right now. Moving on to number 5, this question's regarding the creation of templates for master plans. I think we're open to that. The reason why we're a little hesitant on creating templates is because we don't want to box anyone in. We don't want you to have a format that maybe somebody might feel like they have to follow. That's not necessarily the case. We want to remain flexible as far as that goes, but we do recognize that a template could be helpful, especially for a smaller district that has never done one of these before, or for maybe some new administrative staff that have never done anything like this. And so, you know, we're going to be working on a lot of resources. We're thinking about what the template might look like. but we're never going to make a template a required form. So we're never going to require you to use whatever template we end up putting out if we do. But we are, we're considering the importance of providing one just to serve as an aid for those districts that have never done this before, that need some of that extra guidance. We're already planning and working on guidelines. We're working on that actively, and we're also planning to create lots of other resources like checklists, so that to make it. The goal is to make them much easier to follow and go through, and just to make sure that you're covering all the different provisions that are outlined in education code and that are required. Um, the hope is that many of you with smaller scale plans or more simple plans, you don't have a lot going on in your district in the next 5 years. Everything's pretty good to go. You're not going to be doing a lot. We want to be able to give you the tools to create them on your own as much as we can, or at least a large portion of them. CDE has a lot of resources available. We pointed to those in our last meeting. You can go pull up that item and look at the links there. And it's on the CDE's website. Those are older guidelines, but they're still very relevant. And I know that they're working on updating them. So that's something that, including all these things, we're working collaboratively with CDE to develop guidelines. It's a statutory requirement. We do stuff like that anyways. You guys know that. We also we work with CDE and DSA all the time. This is another case that we're doing that. We have been for a long time, even prior to engaging in these meetings. And so that's something that we're working collaboratively with them and with others to make sure that we can provide you as many resources as possible. Let's see. Going down to question number 6 here. Question number 6 wonders if the master plan must be submitted if the project that triggered the requirement to submit one's already completed. So if you're applying for a reimbursement project that you finished a couple years ago, maybe, do you have to, should the master plan reflect, should it be in there? The master plan requirement's tied to any funding request, whether it's an old one or a new one. It's intended to be a comprehensive district-wide plan, like I mentioned, for 5 years into the future. So while it might not contain the project being applied for, it should include any prospective plans that districts have over the next 5 years. Question 7 is related to the amount of reconciliation OPSC will be conducting on submitted plans. What are we going to do with the information in them, really, is what it's asking. I think the plans are intended to be a planning and evaluation tool for school districts. It's so that you can have a comprehensive view of what is going on in your district and know what your needs are for the next 5 years to help with prioritization of projects and things like that. OPSC is only going to be verifying that the required documents are in place, that the required components are there, and that there's sufficient enough detail to meet statutory requirements. That's all we're going to be using it for. Question 8 is kind of related to question 7. It's kind of the same thing. It's asking what type of review we're going to be conducting. And again, to reiterate, we're only planning to check compliance with the required documentation that needs to be submitted. We're not going to be reviewing the content of the plans beyond what's needed to verify that the statutory requirements are met. So we're not going to be nitpicking the plans like, we don't think that's a good plan or this is a great one. We're not going to be doing that. We're just going to be making sure that you're compliant. Question number 9 is related to accepting addendums or updates to plans without having to completely recreate them. We're totally on board with that. I mentioned this earlier. We don't think you necessarily have to recreate a plan every time you have to update one. Addendums or updates to the plan to make it active for the next 5 years are perfectly fine. Question 10 is requesting the inclusion of a variety of elements related to climate impacts. We got a lot of feedback on this too. They requested that, among other things, that there are guidelines for our prioritization of green schoolyards for outdoor learning spaces. It also suggests that we provide guidelines. OPSC provides guidelines provided on or provided to the to meeting climate resilience and creating pathways for natural greening of schools and obtaining information on how to make your buildings more climate resilient. Our core responsibility here is to ensure that the submitted master plans contain the elements outlined in statute. We do recognize the value of these goals and the importance of them, but we don't intend to make them a requirement. And that's just because they're not outlined in the statute. So we don't want to create any requirements beyond what the statute already requires. But as part of our developing of guidelines, we're going to be working with CDE, I mentioned. And so we do plan on trying to, as much as we can, include information regarding those climate-related aspects so that districts can use those to consider when they're creating their plans or updating their plans to consider incorporating those things. But we don't anticipate that being a requirement. And then last question. Someone suggested that the district should be able to use existing documentation to satisfy the requirements of master plans, things like enrollment forms or forms that detail your facilities, perhaps. OPSC totally agrees with this, and I'm going to mention it here again in a minute, but we intend to provide as much flexibility as we can so long as the requirements are being met. So if you can leverage other things that you have already created, we think that's great. Okay, and then beyond this stakeholder feedback chart, there was a few other topics we put in here we didn't get any comments on, and we were hoping to, or we didn't get a whole lot of comments on them. One of these that we did, we wanted to bring this up and make sure we highlight this item. Rebecca already helped us with that. OPSC is proposing we proposed at the first meeting, and again today, that any master plan have at least 4 years remaining on the plan when it's submitted. The starting point for that time frame should coincide with when the master plan was adopted by the school board. That's what we're suggesting. For example, if a plan was adopted on April 15th of 2026, that plan could be used to submit an application, to be submitted with an application until April 15th of 2027. Obviously, we're going to have some further discussion on that. That's what we're proposing at this time. The next two, for inventory of existing facilities and sites and for enrollment projection, we mentioned leveraging information that's submitted on other forms to be used for the requirements for these for these areas in the master plan. Forms like the 5002 or the Form 5003 can be used for district-wide or site-specific building inventories, for instance, or at least give you a starting point. They may have changed, of course, since they were submitted, but that'll give you kind of a starting point. And then also the 5001 that we use for enrollment projection, that could be used for enrollment verification, for example. So we encourage you to do that. And this is really kind of more of a reminder than anything else. And like I said, we want to encourage everyone to use existing documents that you have so that they don't have to be recreated, and it lowers your level of effort. You can recycle that effort, so to say, on things that you've already created or forms that you've already submitted, and you can leverage that information for use in the master plan. And then finally, this is something that, so the capital planning budget requirements and deliverables, we hadn't received any feedback on this or comments. And it's something that we were really interested in getting feedback on because we don't have a lot of experience with these types of documents. And so currently what we're proposing is to have the applicants submit a narrative that outlines the anticipated budget and expenditure needs within the district to complete the projects that are outlined as part of your 5-year period that follows this submittal. But we're really interested in getting thoughts on this. And like I said, we don't have a ton of experience with these. So we think we could probably cover it more, pretty broadly by just asking for anticipated budget and expenditure needs. But if there's other things you can think of or other ideas you might have on that, we're very interested in hearing that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the questions and answers. There's a lot of information here, and we already got a whole lot of comments and feedback, and we look forward to continuing this discussion for at least another couple meetings. So now is a good time to ask some questions. Let's see, it looks like there was quite a few. Okay, I'm just going to read out of the chat in case some of you don't have access to that, just the questions that have been answered. April asked, will the master plan play any part in application processing, fund release, or audit, or only at the time of application submission? Michael mentioned, hi, April, per SAB action in December, it's proposed that all applications submitted on or after October 31st, I think that should say 2024, not 2023, must submit the plan at the time of processing. OPSC provides roughly 90 days of heads up before processing begins. And then 12 months following approval of the regulations by OAL, the master plan will be submitted with the application. I'm glad Michael mentioned that. This is something that I like to harp on whenever it comes up. Those 90-day notifications, we work really hard on those. And that is the perfect time to soup up your project, to either get your eligibility going or to In this case, perhaps update your master plans, things like that. Those are a really good time to do that. So that's a great question and answer there. They continue on. Hi, Michael. Thank you for that's understood. Aside from these current requirements to bridge the gap until regulations are formally approved, will the master plan be considered at any other point in the application process? And Michael said, currently, we do not intend to relook at the master plan for fund release or audit purposes. Let's see. Janelle Harris says,
Brian, on that one too, though.
Yeah.
There is OPSC won't look at it from expenditure reporting standpoint under 17070.54E. The SCO will work with SCO to build it into the audit program for the K-12 auditors.
That's right. Yeah,
but OPSC is not doing it as part of our processing.
Yeah, that's part of the statute that they informed that. Thank you. Janelle Harris asked a question concerning OPSC in section D, specifically the following paragraph. The department, in consultation with State Department of Education, shall develop guidelines or standards that school districts shall use to develop and submit the inventory, including but not limited to all of the following, and then it lists all the elements. And she asked, with respect to its regulatory authority, does OPSC regard the list of enumerated inventory elements after the following as exhaustive, or does OPSC believe it has authority given but not limited to clause to include additional inventory elements in the guidelines or standards that school districts should use? And Michael mentioned we do not believe the list is exhaustive. We welcome feedback on other elements that stakeholders believe should be included in the master plan as we work on drafting regs. And then Janelle mentions that she's asking because her organization submitted feedback, but it wasn't addressed in this agenda attachment. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. We must have missed it. We'll make sure that we go back and look for that and that we include it next time. We're sorry about that if we missed it.
Janelle, can you let us know, or in the chat, just let us know what organization so we can double check we have that letter?
Yeah. I hope we didn't miss that, or I don't remember talking about that specifically in this item, so we may have missed it. I apologize for that. Clean Air Allies. Okay, thank you. I remember that letter coming in. We must have just missed it. There was a lot of info in there. Thank you for taking the time to do that, Janelle.
Yeah, and I think part of our thought, I think in your letter is will be in the next item or the next month's item as we look at drafting those guidelines too of what we should be required, or at least school districts at minimum consider requiring or implementing into their regs. So yours and a few other recommendations too that might go above and beyond master planning.
Yeah. And then Jesse asks, is there an estimated date to bring the master plan regulations to the SAB? It really just depends on when we can get through all the meetings that we want to make sure that this issue is, I would say, resolved, or at least for the most part agreed upon before we go forward. And so, like I was mentioning before, I think it'll be at least 2 more meetings. So we're probably looking at sometime in the summer that we would bring those regs to the SAB. And then there's the whole rulemaking process for the Office of Administrative Law after that. So that's just a speculation, but that's probably the timeline that we're on for that. Okay, anybody else? Just looking through to see who's here today. Will you be addressing the requirement for a public hearing under Prop 2? Yes, April, thank you. That is one of those things that we are still working on, but I believe we plan to bring that forward. I can't remember within
next
what
meeting,
topic. I think, is it at the next meeting? Okay, next week
on this topic. Yeah, I think we're going to add a certification that it happened at a board meeting, and then kind of like our current 50 funding application form, where we say that the application has been supported by the board, and you enter a board date in that's happening. I think we're envisioning something a similar one, where the district is certifying that this specific SFP application has been addressed at a public hearing, and then you give us the board date for that on the form. It's kind of, I think, what we're envisioning.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, see no other questions right now. just a reminder that we do have another meeting coming up next week at 9 a.m. next Thursday. I think, have we sent that out yet? I don't know if we've sent out the topics that we're talking about yet, but we're going to be bringing back at least 2 topics that we've talked about previously, and we'll have that for you next week. Thank you everybody for taking the time to be here and for asking these great questions and for being interested in what we're doing. We really appreciate all the participation and the collaborative nature of these. So thank you so much for tuning in and for hanging out with us for about an hour today. Also, just a reminder that we post these on our YouTube page. It's OPSCYOU. So I encourage you there to go there and like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, as they say in the YouTube world. Please provide as much information as you can to us. Somebody's telling me that the April 3rd meeting was not uploaded on YouTube. We'll look into that, Christina. Thank you very much for mentioning that. We want to make sure that all of our content is there. So thanks to everybody for being here today. Please send us any information you might have for us to share. We'll make sure that hopefully we won't miss any next time. Apologize about that again. But thanks for being here, and we'll see you all very soon. Have a great day and a great weekend. It's Masters Week, so enjoy the tournament this weekend.